Our focus today is going to be, like I said, unitary and federal states. And we are going to start here by just quickly kind of defining what this means. So over the section that you read for Wednesday, and if you haven't done your notes, then you're going to be this is going to be new material for you. And if you did do your notes, I think sometimes the text, I feel like the textbook reading, especially with this part, was a little bit confusing, a little bit quick. So we're going to make sure we go over it pretty well. But we have spent a lot of time taking a look at international boundaries. And we've taken a look at boundaries between countries and the ways in which boundaries are created between countries. And so we're looking at state boundaries. Now we're going to shift our focus to what goes in within a country and how the political structure of happens internally within a country. And the first way that we're going to break it down is we're going to take a look at the difference between a unitary kind of government structure and a federal government structure. And so when we talk about types of government, you might think, or you might, have learned about a democracy or a monarchy or different. And you may not, because you guys actually don't get a whole lot of, government until really you're a senior. But you probably understand like a little bit what a democracy is. People vote for their representatives and things like that. But this is separate than that. Unitary and federal are really about how the government or how the central government relates to maybe other levels of government. And so a unitary government, okay, so when a country is a unitary state or a unit has a unitary structure of government, there's a central government, okay, so we have a central government in the United States. Our central government is housed right in Washington, D.C. at our national capital. There's a national level government, but that central government has really all the power to create laws for the country. In a sense, we're going to be breaking this down a little bit more than just this slide, but in a sense, that government can create a lot of cohesiveness. The laws that are created by the central government apply to all regions of the country. Okay. In a federal system, so the opposite then of that is a federal system where there's still a central government, there's still a national government, but there's also regional level governments. So different regions of the country, whether you call those provinces or states or whatever the different, or districts or whatever the different regions of, those regions of the government, those regions also have their own government, and the central government and those regional governments share power with one another. So the idea of a federal system is that it recognizes that many countries have a lot of diversity and they have a lot of spatial diversity, that some regions have different wants or needs or interests than the rest of the country, and that a regional government might be better suited to fit those regional needs than the central government, making laws for the entire country. But there's definitely there's a shared aspect. So the central government still has a lot of power. The central government has certain powers and regional governments have other certain powers. So if you take a look at these, which ones of these, so unitary or federal, which one would apply to our country? Federal. Okay, so we are a federal state. So we have a central government, and our central government has particular has particular powers. But we also have state level governments that has authority to make state laws. So when the Minnesota government, right, that works and is based in St. Paul, our capital city, the state legislature of Minnesota makes laws that can applies just to Minnesota. And Texas has different laws, and Georgia has different laws, and California. But the national government also makes laws that apply to the entire nation. They have power to make certain types of laws, and state governments have powers to make other types of laws. Now, the other kind of confusing thing about the unitary government, when I talk about the unitary government, it sounds very much like a dictatorship. Like the central government is making all these laws and and it applies to the entire country. They have all the control. But a unitary state can very much be a democracy. So a democracy system that's unitary would just mean that you might have regional elections. So you still might have different regions of the country, but each of those regions gets to elect a representative that then goes to the national capital and works to make laws. And that representative of that region is representing that particular region, but they're making laws at the central government level. And whatever those laws that they make, whatever the laws get passed, apply to the entire country. There's no patchwork of different laws. Does that make sense? Okay. So unitary does not mean that we're talking about a dictatorship or a monarchy or authoritarian type government. However, most monarchy systems or dictatorship systems or authoritarian systems where a single person or a single group of people have all the power are much more likely, are pretty much exclusively going to be unitary states. So federal systems, you're not going to find too many like dictatorships that are federal systems. Okay, so this is, I have this on a Pear Deck. We're not going to do the Pear Deck because you guys can talk to each other. So the question I'm going to ask you guys to talk about amongst yourselves and so at your table groups is this question. So when we think about a unitary system or a federal system, the question then is, why might a country, and this is going to go a little bit with your FRQ for tomorrow, because your FRQ is going to talk about what are some negative and positive impacts, what's a reason why a country might choose a federal system. So this is going to be helpful for that. For what reasons might a state choose a unitary or a federal system? Okay. So why would a state why would a state choose a unitary system? Why would a state choose a federal system? But also, what types of states, what characteristics of particular states might be more likely to be unitary states, and what characteristics, what types of states are more likely to be federal? So you're going to talk about this at your tables. Derek, why don't we have you move over there with Jane and Riley? And I'll turn the light on to wake you guys up so you guys are ready to talk. Right? Okay, do you guys understand the question? Or what questions do you have about the question? Okay, go ahead. Okay.
That's not the situation. North Korea, that's a dictatorship. That's not a dictatorship.
Beneficial. So they might be more diverse. Maybe like
no, absolutely. That's so like Hitler, he was in charge. He was like over everyone.
He was tired.
Yeah. But then it's a government that has representatives from regions.
Practice separation. So we're going to practice FRQ for tomorrow. So we're going to sit class tomorrow. It's based on what we're talking about in class today. We're going to do a workshop today.
So what did you be?
What do you guys, are you guys sure what types of things are you more unitary or why might
No, it's about.
go that route?
About
State would not be unitary, would be maybe less
A
diverse.
unitary system is
You could maybe go that way.
oh, especially in religious context. Lesser amount of sub-regions.
What if you like small inside, then do it?
You know, so yeah, definitely less diversity, so like more homogeneous are going to be more likely to be unitary.
Have lots of people.
Federalism is going to recognize diversity, especially regional diversity,
Or would it
going
go
to
to federal since they
accommodate to that, right?
I think it also depends on the because if there's lesser people, it's a good chance they're like inclusive, which is then it's like you probably want
Yeah.
a
So
federal.
there is going to be a lot more,
But also, I think the downsides could be
instead of having multiple different like laws in different, states and different things, you're going to have a much more, like even approach to everything, right? There could still be a lot of Yes, you still could have representatives all over the country, and there's still going to have to be a lot of yes, but the and possibly even more important, they're not able to do their
I'd say that English is yellow.
But
is red.
once the laws are passed,
What is
it's actually going to be the same for everybody, right? There's not going to be you see this, it's like
you say was yellow?
passing the laws, and then the government just
You just said
like,
that was yellow.
you guys heard about the voting rights laws that have been passed in the southern states recently, and then the U.S. Attorney General will like sue the state of Georgia over like the laws that they were passing and it's not constitutional. There's some of like the vaccine type mandate type stuff. There were
Why do you have your advisors?
there's like a lot of like, okay, each state is trying to do their own thing, and then like there's conflict, backlash between national government and state government. How are you?
It actually works. It's not red or yellow.
Oh,
Like, do you have colors associated?
yeah, I do. So language arts is blue.
Math.
I'm still on the.
Social studies is green.
Yo.
And math and science are, math is yellow.
Yes.
And science is red.
Yes, science is green.
Science is
Social studies
I
is
think it's just
yellow,
because
and then
Math
math
is
is red.
definitely yellow.
Yeah,
Math
That's
is red.
red.
math
Math
is
is
red.
yellow.
Language
Math is
arts
red.
is
Wait, did you
blue,
say science
and then
is?
science is yellow.
Science is red.
Science is
Science
green.
is green.
Science
No,
is green.
social, geography is green.
No,
No.
social studies is yellow.
Geography.
No.
No.
Geography.
Yeah.
Geography is just.
I was like, maths are blue and green, so it has to be blue or green.
Math is red.
Yeah.
Social studies is yellow.
Math is red.
English
Red
is
is
English is
social
Math
studies.
is
red.
yellow.
Yellow.
Math is yellow.
Yellow? Math is yellow. Why?
English is red, and then
English.
Riley,
Okay.
teaching your.
Math is red.
What did you guys do?
And then English is
Like,
I don't think they asked you to answer the
Yellow.
question.
like,
But then you, when he said math was red, you were like, yeah, that's red.
Math is red.
No.
Yeah, it is.
Yellow.
Yep.
I don't
Oh.
Great friends.
Oh my god. What's that?
Yep.
Math is red.
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah, like.
Do you guys agree?
I'm the teacher.
How did you guys do?
What did you look
How
at?
did you guys do?
What color's math?
Oh, yeah, we did.
Okay, fair enough.
What did you guys talk about?
Social studies.
You
Yeah.
could have a unitary.
What?
but it's not a smaller amount.
Social studies.
Social studies is yellow. I knew it.
Riley, you
Science is
suck.
Yep.
reading and writing is blue.
It says,
Yep.
it says English.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Science is yellow.
All right, we are gonna continue on. I think I saw the recording going.
So I actually looked it up and it said red. So.
Yeah, and I looked it up.
For
Social
math?
studies
You were
is
even
yellow.
recording?
Social studies is yellow too. I looked it up.
Where'd you?
By what
look it
authority?
up?
By Google's authority.
Are you sure you were even recording?
I'm still recording. Yes. So for those of you guys who are listening from home, we're discussing what colors different folders are. All right. Okay, so all right, so you guys had a lot of, we're gonna move on now. So you guys had a lot of good answers, and good discussion. So we're gonna go through, this is a little bit more detailed. So the first slide I showed you guys was not very detailed at all. We're gonna go through this a little bit. This is a little bit more detailed. And so you can add this to your unitary versus federal states, but you don't necessarily have to add everything. And then we are going to talk through why different governments might choose a unitary versus, or why different states might choose a unitary versus federal system. So once again, unitary states place most power in the hands, of central government officials. So a lot of you guys, as I was talking to you and talking to the individual groups, I've heard a couple, 2 or 3 different groups mention that states that are less diverse may choose a unitary system, or it might just work better. Unitary systems might work better in states that are more homogenous, or we also can call those nation states. Now, we know that there are no true nation states, but countries that are closer to the concept of a nation state are more likely to have unitary systems. I also heard people talk about just like the geographic size. So smaller states, whether that be population size, but almost even more importantly, land area. So when we have smaller countries in geographic size, you're more likely to have a unitary system because you have less regional differences. When you think about the vastness of the United States and how the landscape of like Minnesota is very different than the landscape of like Hawaii, obviously, but like the landscape of, Southern California, even just the physical geography is going to lead to different needs. So smaller states that have less of that physical geography difference are going to more likely tend towards unitary states. It's also been used to create cohesion. And so we've talked about this idea of nationalism and this concept that countries want to create. So nationalism can mean a loyalty to a particular national group, but it also can mean loyalty to like the creation of loyalty to your state. And in order to bring people together, countries really want to create, and it can be hard to do, especially in countries that have a lot of diversity, but they want to create this sense of national identity amongst people of different national groups. And so unitary states, when everything kind of is applying to the entire country, it can create that sense of cohesion. However, it can also be used in more of a negative way to create the dominance of an ethnicity or an idea. So as we take a look at like historically, like Nazi Germany, do you think Nazi Germany was a unitary or a federal state? Unitary, right? Germany today is a federal system, but it is, so this idea that and like I mentioned before, so unitary states are not synonymous, is that the right word? Unitary states are not the same as dictatorships, because there's so many countries in the world that are democracies but are unitary states. But if we're talking about the opposite way, dictatorships are almost always going to be unitary states. Does that make sense? So the correlation, like if we have a dictatorship, they're almost always going to be unitary states. A unitary state, however, does not mean that we are a dictatorship. So it's not like a two-way street, right? But so if we were going to make a Venn diagram, we would have dictatorships, and then on the outside of the circle, we'd have unitary states. Do you guys want me to make a Venn diagram? Sure. I mean, it would just be 2 circles in one inside of another. What? Or that someone said something?
Make them squares and not
One
That's
square,
so weird.
one is circle.
Why are we making Venn diagrams squares?
That's what I'm.
or triangle.
Most definitely circles.
just like math is definitely yellow.
Math is
Math is
yellow.
yellow.
Google says it's red.
Google is always
Google is
right.
wrong.
Google's not actually a source, guys. It's a search engine.
Exactly.
Google is my source.
The internet never lies.
All right. So moving on to federal states. All right. So once again, the definition of a federal state is one that shares power with where regional governments share power with the central government. So in this country, our regional governments are more of our state governments. Now we do have below state, like we have local governments, you have city governments, we call those municipal governments. So you have those types of governments as well. But there's kind of this two-tiered system with that sharing. It does work better in multinational states, and it also works well in larger states with diverse environments, cultures, economies, etc. So next week, our big focus is going to be on the concept of devolution. And we are going to see time and time again that when regions of a country are particularly different than the rest of the country, whether that be economically or culturally, or they're just spatially removed. They're an island, right? Or they're just on the edges of a country. That can lead to pressure for them to have more power or have a different type of power due to the fact that they feel like they're separate. Or they feel like they're different than the rest of the government. Okay, so I don't know what that slide is. I mean, I made it, but we're going to skip it. Okay, so federalism, and I've already seen this, so power shared. So in our country, and this is a really quick, we don't need to write this down, but the way in which federalism works in our country is that the national government has certain powers. So this is a Venn diagram. See how it circles? Okay. All right, so our national government has powers over here that are just for the national government. And our state governments have powers that are just reserved for the states. And this is written into our U.S. Constitution. How much do you guys remember learning about the U.S. Constitution?
Absolutely.
Absolutely nothing.
7th grade? You guys actually went to school in 7th grade, though.
We never learned about it.
I don't remember.
I don't know. I was too sad to remember.
I remember this one.
7th grade is a good year to just forget.
I do remember the
Seventh
right to
grade.
bear arms.
Yeah. 7th grade was
The right to bear arms. You remember the Second Amendment. All right. Good. Good work. All right. So I have to teach government next semester. And I've never taught it before. So you can wish me luck. 12th grade. Just one section. So that'll be interesting. So I should probably refresh really quick before like 2 weeks from tomorrow or something like that. No, 3 weeks. All right. So anyway, so the national government has particular powers. The state government has particular powers, and then there's some shared powers that both of the national government and the state governments can both do. So, for example, the national government, the state of Minnesota cannot declare war. Okay, the national government can, but we can't declare war. We can't coin our own money. So every state in the United States has its own, uses the dollar. How confusing would it be if we all had a different form of currency? We can't tax, the only national government can tax the imports and the exports or put tariffs on different goods. So there's certain things in the national government that we can't make a treaty with Canada. The state of Minnesota cannot make a treaty with Canada, but the U.S. government could. So state governments are in control of public education. So every single state is in control of its own public schools. They also are in control of their own election systems. And so over the summer and into the fall, you may have heard, if you guys pay attention to the news, a lot of the voting restrictions that were passed in some of the southern states. Though that is a state law for each state to put in place some of their own ways in which they conduct elections. So, for example, in the 2020 election, one of the big things is about mail-in ballots. So some states were very open to mail-in ballots. People could vote really, really early. People could, And then some states were a lot more restrictive on mail-in ballots. And that was because each state got to kind of decide how they wanted to conduct their own elections. But then in the middle here, both the national and the state governments can collect taxes. So and that's great because every time I get a paycheck, state taxes come out and national taxes come out, right? So our federal taxes come out. We can also, both the state and national government can make laws. So if the national government makes a law, though, that's going to apply to the entire country. If the state government makes a law, that can't counteract. So the central government still has supremacy. So like it still like if the central government makes a law, the state government can say like, well, we make a law saying that that's not a law. But we can make laws that just apply to our state that don't obviously counteract the central government laws. Okay. So this is kind of a map. So take a look at this. This is the unitary states up here and federal states down here. And one of the things you guys mentioned was you said that countries that were like just physically larger, you thought were much more likely to be federal states. So as you take a look at this federal state system here, what do you guys notice? Does that seem pretty accurate? Are those states like geographically larger than a lot of these states here?
Yeah.
On average, right? So yeah, they are. There's definitely some exceptions. So there's definitely some pretty big states up here that are pretty big geographic states that are unitary. What are some notable states or countries that you notice are unitary systems? China, okay? So why do you think China is a unitary system?
Well, they're still not very diverse, even though it's so big.
So yeah, but more importantly, that it's the communist. It's like the communist system, which is very much that single party system and in a communist state. Now we are gonna actually do kind of like a case study on China next week. And although China is considered a unitary system, there are regions of China that do have their own their own autonomy, really. They have a number of what they call autonomous regions. One of them, actually, this is a special administrative region, one of them being Hong Kong. But if you've been following in the past couple of years, and really, I haven't heard much about it anymore, but there was all those Hong Kong protests. Do you guys remember hearing about the Hong Kong protests? That was really over that control because Hong Kong kind of has a separate way of doing things than the rest of China, even though it's part of China. But then China was really trying to take more power away from Hong Kong and place more control over Hong Kong. So there are like different regions within China that have that. Okay, so we're gonna do this and we're gonna pull up one other quick little kind of just check your understanding activity. But so we're just gonna go over a couple other case studies. Nigeria, which we've talked about before. But Nigeria has tons of diversity. But one of the ways that Nigeria is diverse, first of all, remember that Nigeria was a British colony. And when we talked about the Berlin Conference yesterday, we talked about how these boundaries are very much superimposed and they put a lot of people together. And so Nigeria is really one of those examples. It was created as a British colony during the Berlin Conference. And right through the center of Nigeria, we find a vast religious divide between the Islamic northern regions of Nigeria. And it's also economically different. So the southern region is a little more economically wealthy. It has oil. The northern region is a little more desert, and it has it's much more cattle ranchers, or cattle herders. And so Nigeria has a lot of diversity within a pretty small area of land, and they do have a federal system. So this is one of the reasons why they have a federal system. So they have 36 states. And one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that Nigeria does is that each state chooses their own judicial system. So they get to set up their court system and particular laws that that apply to different states. So the 12 northern states do follow a legal system based on traditional Islamic law, and the southern states do not. So you can see like this example of federal system, but each state gets to kind of decide how they set up their system. Another example is, so the opposite example would be a unitary system. And so this kind of goes into the ways in which unitary systems can still have different regions. So unitary systems can still have a lot of different regions. In France, there's 90 different departments. Okay, so 90 different departments would be kind of like what we call our states, I guess, or different like subdivisions. But in those 90 different departments, each department sends representatives to Paris, the capital of France, to express their concerns to the central government. So this region over here, they have representatives and be like, us over here, this is what my people want. And this is what we're facing in our region or in our department. But when they come to the central government, they make laws that apply to the entire country. So even though there's this patchwork of different subnational divisions, there's still this and each country or each department gets to vote on their own representatives. Whatever those representatives then decide in Paris then gets applied to the entire country. So they still have some representation. It's just, it might get overshadowed by what other regions want. Okay, so we're going to stop there. And then I need you guys to head to Schoology. We got time? All right, so head to Schoology, go to our Unit 4 folder, and you're going to do one more kind of table group activity, so I might have to have you move again, Derek. Sorry, I should have just told you to stay there. And I don't remember where it is. Oh, yeah, okay. So why is it? All right, so Unit 4, it's going to be in-class activities. Okay, so you are going to pull up this document, and you may already know, because I just gave you the example of France, I've given you the example of some other countries, but do you guys remember we're in the middle of a pandemic? Like right now, but like, do you guys remember the beginning? And even, okay, so this is basically giving you so each country had very different responses. So if you guys remember, like do you guys remember what was one of the first countries to go on lockdown?
No.
Italy, yeah, I think so. I don't mean, maybe there was a country beforehand, but I remember very early on, like,
Didn't New Zealand fully locked down?
Yeah, New Zealand, yeah, they didn't. I mean, there was this. I don't remember if it was New Zealand or Australia did too for a while. But
mask free by like June of 2020.
Yes, there was this picture of in the summer of 2020 of all, I think it was Australia, maybe it was New Zealand, of all these people at a concert, and it was just like absolutely packed because they pretty much like the pandemic had pretty much subsided because they like just locked everyone out of their country, and it's helpful that you're an island, but yeah. So every country had very different responses to the pandemic. And so you are going to read through these and, do as many as you can as a group. And you're going to just read through them. And even if you already know, so I just told you guys, France is what? A unitary or federal state? Unitary. But I want you, so you already know that France is a unitary state. But I want you to kind of read through their response. And I want you to pick out, like, what is it? How does their response to the pandemic, how does it show that they are, like, how does it exemplify the fact that they are a unitary state? How did their response, like, show that they are a unitary state? And if you don't know, so you might not know what Iran is, right? But read through the response and decide, like, just based on what you're hearing in the response, would you consider them a unitary or federal state? Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. So I'm going to end no, I won't end the recording. I'll just let people just keep watching the video in silence. You guys can do this as a table.
Sorry guys, this is a big word. I take it
No, just discuss.
Have the power of the individual regions to like what they want to do.
Are you talking grants?
I was like how much they want to lock down. Like it was like more or less up to them, and it showed how much longer it took for them to like get rid of the virus rather than just like they're completely shut down for months and they able to get rid of the virus. That's what I got off the top of my head.
Are you on the document?
I kind of just looked at the messages and like,
United States. The reason we still have COVID now.
it's probably more reason to confuse that COVID.
Yeah. The United States. Who's lost money? It was Well, it was in France until it's unitary because the president of the republic decreed the closure of stuff.
I think I read like the bill just based on the fact that they should the Ministry of Sports and Youth shut down. Is that like a big thing or is that like a local club they have? Or is that like a president?
My guess is their government probably has the
Then never mind, I can do that for a call. Oh yeah. Oh wait. Oh wow.
Actually, I think it is going to be federal because the Ministry of Islamic Culture guys announced cancellation of concerts.
What's it called? Germany literally has a pandemic plan. You go with that. Well, they're federal, and she said that earlier. United States, federal.
Nigeria is federal because the state government is COVID.
That was fun.
I want to say Norway federal because nothing was like completely locked down like Trump, which is discouraging. And not all the laws and businesses were closed.
Yeah. United States.
And then we're only with the lessons, not visit others. Vulnerable groups.
I would say federal, yeah, because it's they didn't just say no to everything. Like it would be like the
And different groups said yes.
so it would be like the cities like the city.
All right. I know we don't have tons of time, so we're just going to go through these. France, we already knew was unitary, but what is it about their response that kind of shows you that they're unitary? Say it louder. Was their response like state by state or department by department, or was the response a national response? National response, okay? How about Iran? This one's a little bit harder to like figure out like what's going on here. There's lots of ministries. Yeah.
I said federal because there's like a ton of different ministries.
Yeah, so it is unitary, however, and I think that it's confusing. But the ministries are like the central government. Like ministries would be like our Department of Justice or like Department of State. So they're all right. Hold off, guys. We have plenty of time. So Nigeria is. We already knew Nigeria was federal, and in this it talks about state by state. So it says like Lagos State did this, Ogun State did this, and so it talks a little bit about the differences in states. What about Norway? It's yeah. So the Norwegian Directorate of Health introduced a number of measures, and so all it says is like the Directorate of Health did all these things, but they're going to apply pretty much to everyone. We know the United States is a federal system. Every state, and this is a huge, almost like during the pandemic, there was a lot of criticism of the United States' response, and part of it was that every state did their own thing. So Minnesota, for the longest time, had mask mandates. We don't anymore, but we had mask mandates, right, for the entire state. So you were in public places or in particular places, you have to wear a mask. But a lot of states, there were plenty of states that refused to ever do a mask mandate. There were states that kind of shut down, like California shut down a lot of different things. And there were other states that just remained 100% open. So it was very much of a patchwork. So when we talk about things like a pandemic or like a national emergency, when you have this federal system, it's harder to actually put into place like a unified response. Germany is also federal as well. All right. So hopefully that is enough information to help you guys along your way with your FRQ tomorrow. Bring that to class tomorrow, ready to discuss.